The morning sun rose slowly over the jagged ridges of Iran's Zagros Mountains, spilling pale light into a wooden cabin perched precariously on the hillside. For most, dawn is a promise of warmth and renewal. But for Sakine, a mother of 2 young children, it was a reminder that the day's battles had only just begun. Her husband was gone. He had married another woman in secret, fathered a child elsewhere, and then abandoned the family without remorse. Left with nothing but her children and a fragile hope for survival, Sakine walked away from her old life. She carried no dowry, no possessions, no man's protection, only the weight of responsibility pressing hard against her thin shoulders. In these highlands, where winters bite and summers parch, survival is never guaranteed. Yet Sakine had resolved to make this lonely cabin their sanctuary, however harsh and unforgiving. That morning, hunger gnawed at the household. The children had woken without breakfast. Roya, the older daughter, clutched her stomach, her voice breaking with the honesty of a child. She was hungry. There were still a few eggs left over from the day before, but Sakine refused to cook them. They must be stretched, saved for another time. In this new life, every grain of rice, every drop of oil, every egg carried the weight of the future. Instead, she had another plan. She packed a bundle with quiet precision, soap, towels, and a kettle. Alongside the necessities, she added a fishing net. This would be their answer to hunger. They would walk down to the river, a long, difficult trek through rocky paths and thorny brush. And there, she hoped, they would find fish enough to still the children's cries. Roya's eyes brightened at the promise of adventure. But her small voice betrayed another desire. Cheese. She wanted what she remembered from easier days, the tang of goat's milk pressed into curds. Yet Sakine had neither goats nor cheese to offer. Her answer was a gentle silence, the kind that carried both love and sorrow. Education, even in the wilderness, was not forgotten. Roya, though still of preschool age, took out a worn workbook and copied words with a determination that seemed older than her years. Among Iran's nomadic families, mothers and fathers are their children's first teachers. They teach letters, numbers, and prayers, but they also pass down harder lessons: how to endure thirst, how to kindle a fire in wet grass, how to live without complaint when the world turns cruel. Roya had already begun absorbing those lessons. Sakine, meanwhile, cradled her infant daughter, feeding her before they set out. The baby's cries softened, replaced by the sound of Roya's pencil scratching on paper. For a brief moment, the cabin seemed almost peaceful, but Sakine knew peace never lasted long here. She lifted the infant into a cradle, wrapped her securely, and prepared to leave. The kettle clanged softly against the net as she slung the bundle across her back. To an outsider, the inclusion of a pot might seem curious, but Sakine had thought it through. She would not only fish today, she would also heat water by the river so her children could bathe. Cleanliness was a luxury in these mountains, but it was also a form of dignity. The path to the river was cruel. Loose stones slipped underfoot, thorn bushes tore at their clothes, and Roya, still small, soon tired. Sakine lifted her daughter into her arms, clutching the baby close with the other. Her back bent, her breath grew ragged, but she pressed forward. This was the nature of her love, silent, uncomplaining, and relentless. The mountains seemed to conspire against her with each step. The sun burned overhead, yet shadows in the valley chilled her bones. But Sakine carried on, carrying not only her children's weight but their very futures. At last, the sound of rushing water reached them. A spring-fed stream, narrow yet alive, twisted its way through the rocks. For nomadic families in Iran's arid ranges, water is as precious as gold. It is drawn from faraway springs, carried over steep ridges, and rationed with care. This river was not merely a source of food, it was survival itself. Sakine bent to fill a jug. The cool water slipped between her fingers, shocking against her calloused hands. She drank deeply, then let Roya sip. Already, this journey had taken its toll, but there was no time to rest. She set down the jug and unfurled the fishing net. The first cast yielded nothing. The net drifted, empty, mocking her effort. She pulled it back, her arms trembling with strain, and tried again. A second cast, a pause, a tug, and then success. A single fish writhed in the net, its silver scales flashing in the mountain light. It was not large, not enough to satisfy the gnawing hunger of 3 mouths. But it was proof that hope remained. In this land where betrayal and scarcity seemed to define her life, the river offered a small gift. "Look, Roya," she whispered. The child's eyes widened, her hunger momentarily replaced by wonder. Another cast, and another gift. 2 more fish, glistening with life, flipping desperately in the net. 3 fish now lay in her basket. A modest meal, but to Sakine it was victory. Yet even triumph came with interruption. The baby cried. Roya, curious and unsteady, wandered too close to the water. Fear pierced Sakina like a blade. She rushed to wash her hands, then gathered both children close, her heart pounding with the terror every mother knows that survival means nothing if safety slips away for even a moment. To keep the children secure, she fixed the net in place, anchoring it to the rocks, so she could tend to them without losing her chance at food. This was her balancing act. Mother and provider, protector and hunter, never allowed the luxury of being only one or the other. By afternoon, she turned from fishing to cleaning. Kneeling at the river's edge, she scaled and gutted the fish, the metallic tang of blood mixed with the sharp freshness of mountain air. These 3 creatures, caught by her own hands, would become the evening meal, a rare comfort in their sparse existence. But Sakine's work was not done. She lit a small fire, heated water in her pot, and began the delicate task of bathing her children. The baby, just 3 months old, whimpered as the warm water touched her skin. Roya laughed nervously, splashing, half child, half survivor. Here, by the river, surrounded by hardship, Sakine carved out a moment of tenderness. She wrapped the baby tightly, keeping her warm against the mountain chill, then guided Roya through her wash. In these small acts, the strokes of a washcloth, the care of drying her daughter's hair, lay the depth of her love. As the sun tilted westward, Sakine gathered the washed clothes, wrung them dry, and spread them on nearby rocks to catch the fading light. The garments, threadbare and patched, flapped gently in the breeze like flags of endurance. She packed the fish, secured her children, and began the long trek back uphill to their cabin. The day had been hard. Hunger remained only partly eased, the body weary, the spirit tested. Yet she had managed food, clean water, and even a little dignity. In a life where survival itself was an act of defiance, these were not small victories. For Sakine, the story was not simply about enduring hardship. It was about proving, again and again, that even in betrayal, abandonment, and isolation, a mother's love could still build a fragile sanctuary. And so, with the shadows lengthening across the ridges, the mother and her 2 children began their slow ascent home, clutching not just their fish and their bundle of clothes, but also the quiet resilience that had carried them through yet another day. Evening settled slowly over the mountains. The horizon glowed a deep orange, fading into violet shadows that wrapped the valley. By the time Sakina reached the cabin, her arms ached from carrying both children, and her legs trembled from the climb. Yet she did not pause. Survival left no room for rest. She set the basket down on the cabin floor and looked around the small space that was now their home. The wooden walls creaked softly with the night wind. The air was cool, smelling faintly of damp timber and smoke. It was not much, but it was shelter, something many women abandoned by their husbands could not claim. Sakine placed the fish on a rough wooden table. Their silver skin caught the last of the daylight as though mocking the darkness inside. She struck a match, lit a lamp, and set about preparing dinner. The fire crackled weakly as she placed a pan over it. With no oil to spare, she cooked the fish as simply as possible, salt rubbed into the flesh, seared quickly, enough to make the skin crisp. The smell filled the cabin, drawing Roya closer. Her eyes widened, her hunger plain, yet she waited patiently. It would not be enough. 3 fish split among 3 mouths left little more than a taste. Sakina knew it, felt it as her own stomach tightened. Yet she portioned carefully, giving the children first, ensuring their plates were full before she served herself. Roya ate eagerly, wiping her fingers across her lips. The baby nursed quietly after her small share of broth. Sakine chewed slowly, each bite both nourishment and reminder. Every meal was a victory. But as the children grew quieter, the weight of the day pressed heavier. Roya's small hands trembled as she reached for more food that was not there. She tried not to complain, but her eyes betrayed her longing. Finally, she broke into tears, her voice carrying all the confusion of a child too young to understand betrayal, hunger, and loss. Why had her father left? Why was life so hard? Sakina did not answer with words. She wrapped Roya in her arms, cradled her head against her chest, and rocked her gently until the sobs softened. She whispered small reassurances, though her own heart felt raw with pain. Behind her strength lived fear. Fear that the children would one day resent her, or worse, lose faith in her. But for now, She gave them the only thing she could, the certainty of her love. When Roya's breathing steadied, Sakina laid her on a mat beside her sister. The baby was already asleep, her tiny chest rising and falling in the dim light. Silence filled the cabin, broken only by the faint crackle of dying embers. Sakina sat alone, staring into the shadows. Her thoughts wandered backward to the betrayal, the rejection, the moment she realized she could no longer stay in her husband's house. In a society where women's voices were often silenced, where their worth was measured through obedience, her decision to walk away was radical. It was an act of defiance, born not from pride but from necessity. The world outside saw her as weak, a woman discarded. Yet here, in this fragile wooden shelter, she was everything: provider, protector, mother, and father. Still, doubt crept in. Could she sustain this? Could she raise her daughters alone, with little food, no money, and no support? The questions circled like vultures in her mind. But despair, she knew, was a luxury she could not afford. At dawn, she rose again. The mountains glowed pale under the first light, the air sharp with cold. Sakine washed quickly at the stream nearby, her hands red from icy water, then prepared the children for the day. She had made a decision during the long hours of the night. She would seek work. Fishing and foraging might sustain them briefly, but it could not last. They needed money, however little, to buy food, to keep the children alive through the coming winter. There was a small town some miles away, a cluster of shops, workshops, and tea houses. Perhaps someone there would offer her work. It would not be easy. Jobs for women were scarce, and with 2 children in tow, her chances were slim. But Sakina had no choice. The walk was long. Roya grew tired quickly, asking to be carried. The baby whimpered in the wrap against Sakine's chest. Dust rose beneath their feet, the sun pressing hard from above. By the time they reached the edge of town, sweat streaked Sakine's face, and her back ached from the weight of her burdens. Shops buzzed with life. Men called out prices for fruit, spices, and cloth. Children darted between stalls. Women bargained, their voices sharp. It was a world alive with noise and color, a stark contrast to the silence of the mountains. Yet, as Sakina entered, eyes turned. Whispers followed. A woman alone with children, searching not for goods but for work. Her presence marked her as different, even desperate. She ignored the stares and approached a small restaurant. The air smelled of grilled meat and bread, enough to make her stomach twist in hunger. The owner, a middle-aged man with lines carved deep into his face, looked up as she entered. "What do you need?" he asked, his tone impatient. "I am looking for work," she replied, her voice steady despite the tremor inside. "I can clean, wash dishes, sweep anything, as reckoned as afterwards seen." The man's eyes flicked to the baby strapped to her chest, then to Roya clutching her skirt, his brows furrowed. "You have children. How will you work?" Sakine's heart raced. She had no answer that would satisfy him. Yet she held her ground. "They will stay with me. I will work hard. I ask only for a chance." For a moment, silence stretched between them. Then the man sighed. Perhaps it was pity. Perhaps practicality. He needed help. He nodded once. "Clean the floors. Start today." Relief washed over Sakine like rain on parched soil. She bowed her head in gratitude, then set to work immediately. The broom scraped across the tiles as Roya sat quietly in a corner, clutching a doll made from rags. The baby slept fitfully against her mother's chest. Each stroke of the broom raised dust. Each bucket of water left her hands raw. Yet Sakine worked without pause, her mind focused only on earning enough to buy bread, rice, maybe even a little cheese for her daughter. By nightfall, her back was bent, her knees bruised from scrubbing. But when the restaurant closed, the owner handed her a small bundle of coins. It was little, hardly enough for a full meal, but it was a start. Sakine held the coins tightly as though they were treasure. To her, they were not metal but survival, a promise that her children would eat tomorrow, that their journey had not been in vain. She bought bread and a little milk before leaving town. Roya ate on the walk back, crumbs falling into the dust. The baby suckled quietly, soothed for the first time in days. When they reached the cabin, the stars were already burning bright above the mountains. The night was cold, but Sakine did not feel it. For the first time since her husband's betrayal, she felt something else stirring within her, a fragile spark of hope. Here, in the harshness of Iran's mountains, a woman abandoned had begun to build a life anew. Not easy, not secure, but hers. And with each step forward, Sakine was writing a story greater than her suffering. the story of survival against all odds. The mountains slept beneath a blanket of stars. Inside the wooden cabin, Sakine lay awake, her daughters pressed close against her. The fire had died, and the night air seeped in, sharp and unforgiving. She pulled the thin blanket higher, wrapping it around Roya's small body, then stroked the baby's hair until her breathing grew even. Sleep would not come. The questions of tomorrow pressed too heavily. Would there be work again? Would the coins she earned be enough? What if sickness struck? What if the mountains swallowed them whole, leaving no one to know or care? The silence gave no answers, only the faint sigh of wind through the trees. At dawn, she rose once more, her movements quiet so as not to wake the children. She stepped outside, barefoot in the chill. The ground was damp with dew, and the valley below glowed faintly as the sun crept over the horizon. This land was not kind. It demanded strength from all who lived here. For centuries, nomadic women had endured its harshness, scorching summers, freezing winters, endless hunger. Yet they endured. Their resilience was carved not into monuments, but into the lines of their hands, the wrinkles around their eyes, the rhythm of their steps as they carried water, firewood, children, and hope. Sakine was part of this lineage now. Betrayal had cast her into exile, but it had also returned her to the raw truth of survival, the place where women before her had always stood. Later that morning, she prepared once again for the long walk into town. Roya, still sleepy, stumbled at her side, while the baby squirmed against her chest. The path was steep and rocky, but Sakine's pace did not falter. In town, she scrubbed floors, washed dishes, and swept dust until her arms burned. She earned little, but little was enough. Bread, lentils, sometimes a few vegetables. Each purchase felt like triumph. Still, the work came with whispers. Men at the tea house shook their heads. Her husband left her, they muttered. Women avoided her eyes, afraid perhaps that her misfortune was contagious. In this society, to be abandoned was to be marked. But Sakine kept her gaze low, her hands busy. Every coin she earned was an act of defiance. Every day she returned home with food was proof that survival could be wrestled from shame. Nights in the cabin grew colder. The children huddled close, their laughter rare but precious. Sometimes, Roya asked questions her mother could not answer. Why doesn't Baba come back? Sakine's throat tightened. She stroked her daughter's hair. Because Baba chose another path. But we are strong. We will walk our own. The words tasted bitter, but they were necessary. She could not let her daughters believe that their worth was tied to a man's choice. Their survival, their dignity, their future, these would be written by their own hands. As weeks passed, Sakine's body hardened under the strain. The once soft skin of her palms grew calloused, her shoulders ached with permanent weight. Yet something else hardened too, her resolve. Each dawn, she rose. Each night, she returned with food. Slowly, the children grew accustomed to the rhythm of scarcity. Hunger was no longer a stranger, but a companion. And yet, even in hardship, Sakine sought beauty. When she cooked, she added herbs if she could find them, remembering the flavors of nomadic life. When she washed clothes by the river, she sang softly, her voice weaving lullabies into the air. When Roya wept from exhaustion, she told her stories of brave women who crossed deserts, who raised nations, who endured when men faltered. Through these small acts, Sakine planted seeds of resilience in her daughters' hearts. One evening, as they ate their simple meal, Roya looked up, her eyes solemn. "Mama, are we poor?" The question struck deep. Sakine paused, then placed her hand over her daughters. "We have little," she admitted, "but we are rich in courage, we are rich in love, and with those, we can survive anything." Roya nodded slowly, her child's mind trying to grasp such words. Yet in that moment, something shifted, an understanding that survival was not only about food and shelter, but also about dignity, about the invisible strength that could not be stolen. Outside their cabin, the mountains stretched vast and eternal. They bore witness to her struggle, indifferent yet enduring, just as the desert had watched generations of women like her. For every woman abandoned, silenced, or cast aside, there had always been others who chose to rise, to carry on, to protect their children even when the world denied them. Sakine's life was not an exception. It was part of a larger story, a story of survival written not in books, but in footsteps worn into mountain paths, in scars left on hands that had tilled earth and carried water, in the lullabies sung to children under star-strewn skies. Her cabin, fragile and forgotten by the world, was a monument all its own, not of stone, but of endurance. As winter approached, the nights grew longer. Snow threatened the peaks, promising even greater trials. Yet Sakine faced the future with the same quiet determination. She did not dream of wealth or rescue. She dreamed only of tomorrow's meal, of keeping the fire alive, of ensuring her daughter's laughter survived the cold. In the eyes of the world, she was a woman discarded. But in truth, she was a woman reborn, tested by betrayal, hardened by hunger, sustained by love. And so, step by step, day by day, she walked forward. Through the mountains, through the dust, through the silence of nights and the burden of days, carrying not just her children, but the legacy of every woman who had ever chosen survival when the world offered none. Her story was not one of defeat. It was the story of endurance, the story of a woman who refused to disappear, who refused to let her children vanish into hunger and despair. The desert was vast, the mountains unyielding, but Sakine was vaster still, her spirit unyielding. And in the quiet heart of Iran's nomadic lands, a truth echoed. When a woman is left with nothing, she discovers that she is capable of everything. Thank you so much for watching this story. If you enjoyed it and want to see more powerful stories of survival and history, please don't forget to give this video a like, share it with your friends, and subscribe to the channel. Your support means the world to us, and it helps us bring you even more untold stories from around the world. See you in the next episode.